You're browsing the internet late at night, scrolling through message boards when most of the world is asleep. The familiar blue glow of your screen illuminates your face as you dive deeper into threads filled with strange stories and unexplained experiences. But then you stumble across something that makes your blood run cold. A series of posts that document a descent into absolute terror, shared in real time by someone who had no idea what was waiting for him in the darkness of sleep. This is the story of one of Japan's earliest and most disturbing internet mysteries, a legend that emerged from the anonymous depths of online forums and left readers questioning the very nature of dreams themselves. The original poster vanished after his final message, just 2 words that would haunt everyone who followed his journey. His real username was anonymous, lost to the digital void like so many others on those early message boards. But the people who witnessed his story, those who stayed up through countless nights reading his updates, they gave him a name. They called him Riku. And what Riku shared with the world was something that defied explanation, something that made even the most skeptical readers lock their doors and leave the lights on. What I'm about to tell you isn't just another ghost story shared around a campfire. This is Monkey Dream, or as it's known in Japanese, Yuenmeng, a recurring nightmare that doesn't just visit you while you sleep, but follows you into the waking world with mechanical precision. A dream featuring a toy-like creature that announces stages of pain, each one more unbearable than the last. And according to Riku's detailed posts, each dream left physical marks on his body that couldn't be explained by medical science. The legend speaks of a mechanical monkey holding tiny cymbals, its face disturbingly lifelike, despite being made of metal and gears. Before the dreams began consuming his life, Riku was nothing more than another face in the endless sea of Tokyo office workers. A young man in his mid-20s, he lived the kind of routine-driven existence that millions of others knew intimately. His days started with crowded train rides to a generic office building where he processed paperwork and attended meetings that seemed to accomplish nothing. His evenings ended with convenience store dinners eaten alone in a small apartment that felt more like a storage unit than a home. There was nothing particularly special about Riku, nothing that would mark him as someone destined for supernatural encounters. He was quiet by nature, the kind of person who preferred observing conversations rather than leading them. His co-workers knew him as reliable but unremarkable, someone who completed his tasks efficiently but rarely volunteered for anything beyond his basic responsibilities. If you had passed him on the street during those early months, you wouldn't have given him a second glance. But even in those normal days, there were subtle signs that something was building beneath the surface of his ordinary existence. Riku had always been prone to stress, the kind that manifested as tension headaches and restless nights. He would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through work problems and social anxieties that felt overwhelming in the darkness. Sleep came reluctantly, often interrupted by sounds from neighboring apartments or the distant rumble of late-night trains. In his early posts on the message board before the dreams began, Riku mentioned experiencing occasional bouts of insomnia that left him feeling disconnected from the world around him. He would describe hearing faint metallic sounds in his apartment during quiet moments, sounds that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. At first, he attributed these experiences to stress and urban living, the natural byproducts of modern Japanese life that everyone learned to endure. His writing during this period revealed someone searching for connection, reaching out to the anonymous community of the message board for the kind of understanding he couldn't find in his daily interactions. He shared mundane details about his work frustrations and social awkwardness with the honesty that only anonymity could provide. Other users responded with empathy and similar experiences, creating the kind of digital camaraderie that would become crucial when his situation took a darker turn. Looking back at these early posts, there's an almost tragic innocence to them. Riku was simply a lonely young man seeking community and understanding, with no idea that he was about to become the subject of one of the internet's most terrifying documented experiences. He approached the message board as a place of refuge, somewhere he could express thoughts and feelings that had no outlet in his carefully controlled daily routine. The stress he described was familiar to anyone who had navigated the pressures of modern Japanese society: long working hours, social expectations, the constant feeling of falling behind despite doing everything that was expected of him. His posts painted a picture of someone who was quietly struggling, but trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy that society demanded. In those final weeks before the dreams began, Riku's posts took on a slightly different tone. He mentioned feeling watched in crowds, experiencing moments of disorientation where familiar places seemed foreign and threatening. He would catch himself listening for sounds that weren't there, turning toward movements in his peripheral vision that vanished when he looked directly. These experiences were subtle enough that he dismissed them as products of his ongoing stress and sleep deprivation. But those subtle warning signs were nothing compared to what began on a cold February evening when exhaustion finally overtook his resistance to sleep. Riku had been fighting insomnia for weeks, surviving on convenience store coffee and sheer willpower, but the human body has its limits. That night, despite every instinct screaming at him to stay awake, his consciousness slipped away into the darkness he'd been desperately trying to avoid. The dream began not with falling or flying, but with the gentle rocking motion of a small train. Riku found himself seated on what appeared to be a child's amusement park ride, the kind with bright primary colors and cheerful music that should have felt innocent and safe. The seats were tiny, designed for children, forcing his adult frame into an uncomfortable crouch. The train car was painted in garish yellows and reds, with cartoon animals decorating the sides that seemed to watch him with painted eyes that followed his movements. But beyond the colorful confines of this miniature train, absolute darkness stretched in every direction. Not the natural darkness of night, but something deeper and more complete, as if the train was traveling through a void where light itself couldn't exist. The contrast was jarring and wrong. This bright children's ride moving through an endless abyss with mechanical precision. The train's movement felt both artificial and alive, each rock and sway too deliberate to be natural, yet too organic to be purely mechanical. The wheels beneath him clicked against invisible tracks with a rhythm that seemed almost like breathing, and the entire vehicle hummed with an energy that made his skin crawl. This wasn't just a dream about riding a train. This was something else entirely, something that felt more real than the waking world he'd left behind. That's when he heard the cymbals. The sound came from somewhere ahead of him, a bright metallic clang that cut through the darkness like a blade. Once, twice, 3 times, each strike perfectly timed with the train's movement. And then, emerging from the shadows at the front of the car, he saw it, the mechanical monkey that would haunt his dreams for weeks to come. The creature was no larger than a child's toy, perhaps 2 feet tall, but its presence filled the entire dreamscape with menace. Its body was clearly artificial, constructed from brass gears and copper wiring that gleamed in the train's colored lights. But the face was something else entirely. Living eyes set in metal sockets, blinking with wet, organic movement that shouldn't have been possible. Its mouth moved with too much realism, revealing tiny white teeth that looked disturbingly human. The monkey held a pair of miniature cymbals in its mechanical hands, and when it struck them together, the sound reverberated not just through the air, but through Riku's very bones. Its voice, when it finally spoke, was the most disturbing element of all. High and childlike, the kind of innocent tone you'd expect from a carnival toy, but distorted by an underlying mechanical buzz that made every word feel wrong. "Welcome to the first pain," the monkey announced with grotesque cheerfulness. "Today we learn about sharp things." Before Riku could respond, before he could even process what was happening, the sensation began. It started as a tingling in his arms, a feeling like pins and needles, but sharper, more focused. Then it escalated rapidly into something far worse. Invisible needles began piercing his skin from the inside out, hundreds of them finding every nerve ending in his body simultaneously. The pain was unlike anything he'd ever experienced in waking life. Each puncture felt precise and deliberate, as if something was methodically mapping every sensitive point on his body and targeting them with surgical accuracy. He tried to scream, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness beyond the train. He tried to move, to escape, but his body was paralyzed except for the involuntary trembling caused by the assault on his nervous system. The monkey watched with those horribly alive eyes, its expression never changing from that innocent, childlike curiosity. It continued striking the cymbals in perfect rhythm, and with each metallic clang, the stabbing sensations intensified. What had started as needle pricks became knife wounds, then sword thrusts, each one deeper and more agonizing than the last. Time moved strangely in this place between sleep and terror. The pain could have lasted minutes or hours, building to levels that should have caused him to lose consciousness, but somehow didn't. Just when Riku thought he couldn't endure another second, when his mind was fracturing under the assault, the monkey tilted its head and spoke again. "Class dismissed," it said with that same cheerful tone. "See you tomorrow for lesson 2. The train lurched to a stop with a mechanical screech that sounded almost like laughter. The colored lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging everything into that absolute darkness. And then Riku was falling, not through space, but through layers of consciousness, tumbling back toward the waking world with the echo of cymbals ringing in his ears. He jerked awake in his apartment with a gasp that tore at his throat. Dawn light was filtering through his thin curtains, and for a moment, relief flooded through him. It had been a dream, nothing more than a particularly vivid nightmare brought on by stress and sleep deprivation. He sat up in bed, running his hands through sweat-soaked hair, already beginning to rationalize the experience away. But then he looked down at his arms, and the relief died in his chest. Dozens of small red marks covered his skin, perfectly circular and precisely spaced. They looked exactly like needle punctures, each one surrounded by a small circle of inflammation that suggested they were fresh. Riku stared at his arms in horror, turning them over and over in the growing daylight, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. He stumbled to the bathroom mirror and pulled off his shirt, revealing similar marks covering his chest, back, and legs, hundreds of tiny wounds that corresponded exactly to what he'd felt in the dream. They weren't deep enough to be dangerous, but they were undeniably real, undeniably there, undeniably impossible to explain through any rational means. The rest of that day passed in a haze of confusion and growing dread. At work, Riku moved through his usual routine like a sleepwalker, his mind constantly returning to the marks on his body and the memory of that mechanical monkey's childlike voice. His co-workers noticed his distraction, the way he kept unconsciously touching his arms, the dark circles under his eyes that suggested a night of poor sleep. That afternoon, Riku's hands trembled as he typed his first message to the forum. "Something happened to me last night that I can't explain," he wrote. "I had a dream, but when I woke up, my body showed signs of what happened in the dream. Has anyone else experienced anything like this?" The responses came quickly. Some users mocked him, suggesting he'd hurt himself while sleepwalking. Others shared their own strange dream experiences, though none quite like his. A few offered genuine concern, advising him to see a doctor or take time off work, but one response stood out from the rest, posted by a user with no profile information. "The monkey chooses who it visits. There are 4 lessons it must teach. You've only had the first." Riku stared at those words until his eyes watered. Someone else knew about the monkey. Someone else understood what was happening to him. He refreshed the page obsessively, waiting for more information, but the mysterious user never posted again. As evening approached, exhaustion weighed heavily on his shoulders despite his determination to stay awake. The second dream came 3 nights later, after Riku had managed to survive on micro-naps and pure adrenaline. His body finally betrayed him during a late meeting at work, his head dropping forward as consciousness slipped away right there at the conference table. In that brief moment of unwilling sleep, he was back on the colorful train. This time, the monkey's voice carried a slightly different quality, still childlike, but with an edge of static that made Riku's teeth ache. "Welcome to the second pane," it announced with mechanical precision. "Today we learn about breaking things from the inside." The sensation began in his bones, a deep pressure that felt like his skeleton was being compressed in an invisible vice. His ribs creaked under impossible force, and he could feel his arm bones bending beyond their natural limits. The pain was so intense that his consciousness flickered, but he couldn't escape into unconsciousness. The monkey's cymbals crashed together with each wave of agony, and Riku watched in horror as cracks appeared along his dream body's limbs. When he jerked awake at his desk, his co-workers were staring at him with concern, but their worried expressions faded into the background as Riku became aware of the deep, throbbing ache in every bone of his body. X-rays at the hospital that evening showed nothing abnormal, but the pain persisted for days, a constant reminder that something was systematically destroying him from within. His posts on the message board became more desperate, more detailed. Other users began following his story with morbid fascination, some offering theories about sleep disorders or psychological trauma. But as the days passed and Riku's condition worsened, the tone of the responses changed. People were genuinely frightened, not just for Riku, but for themselves. Several users reported hearing faint metallic sounds in their own homes after reading his updates. The third dream arrived exactly 1 week after the second. This time, Riku didn't even make it home from work before exhaustion claimed him. He fell asleep, standing on the crowded train, swaying with the motion of the car as his mind slipped into that familiar nightmare landscape. "Welcome to the third pane," the monkey said, and now its voice carried an unmistakable note of corruption, as if the act of inflicting suffering was changing the creature itself. "Today we learn about consuming fire." The flames began beneath his skin, invisible but unbearably real. Every cell in his body ignited simultaneously, creating a sensation of burning alive from the inside out. Riku tried to scream, but the sound emerged as nothing more than a whisper that was immediately swallowed by the darkness surrounding the train. The monkey watched with those disturbingly human eyes as Riku's dream body writhed in agony, its cymbals marking time like a metronome of torture. When he woke on the train platform, concerned strangers were helping him to his feet. His clothes were soaked with sweat, and angry red welts covered every inch of exposed skin. The burns faded over the following days, but slowly, leaving traces that medical professionals couldn't explain or treat. Riku stopped going to work. He stopped eating regular meals. His apartment became a fortress where he waged a losing battle against sleep, surrounding himself with alarms, bright lights, and stimulants that grew less effective with each passing day. His posts on the message board became erratic, filled with paranoid observations about shadows moving in his peripheral vision and the sound of tiny cymbals echoing through his building's ventilation system. The community that had formed around his story was fracturing. Some users begged him to seek professional help, insisting that whatever was happening to him had to have a rational explanation. Others warned him to run, to leave the city, to do anything except face whatever was waiting for him in sleep. A few claimed they were experiencing similar dreams after following his post too closely, though none reported the physical manifestations that plagued Riku. 2 weeks after the third dream, Riku's resistance finally crumbled. His final posts were barely coherent, fragments of thoughts about mechanical laughter in empty rooms and the feeling of being watched by invisible eyes. "I can hear it getting closer," he wrote. "The train is coming whether I sleep or not. It's not medical. Something is waiting for me in that place, and I think it's almost finished with its lessons." The fourth dream came on a Tuesday night, pulling him down into unconsciousness despite every chemical aid and mental exercise he'd tried to stay awake. The colorful train felt different this time, more solid somehow, as if the barrier between the dream world and reality was wearing thin. "Welcome to the fourth pain," the monkey announced, and its voice was now completely alien, a sound like grinding gears trying to form human words. "Today we learn about taking things apart, piece by piece." The dismemberment began slowly, methodically. Invisible hands pulled at his fingers, separating joints with surgical precision. The sensation spread up his arms, across his torso, down his legs, each piece of him being carefully disconnected from the whole. The pain was beyond description, beyond human endurance, yet he remained conscious throughout the entire process, forced to experience every moment of his systematic destruction. When Riku woke in his apartment, he couldn't move. Deep lacerations covered his body in precise patterns, as if something had indeed tried to take him apart and put him back together. He lay there for hours, too weak to reach his phone, too terrified to close his eyes again. His final post to the message board came 3 days later, typed with shaking hands that could barely hold steady long enough to form words. "It spoke to me again last night, even though I didn't sleep. The monkey told me about the fifth pain. It said that after the fifth lesson, students don't need to wake up anymore. They get to stay in the classroom forever." The responses were immediate and frantic. Users pleaded with him to call emergency services, to check himself into a hospital, to do anything except give in to whatever force was pursuing him. Some offered to come find him if he would share his location. Others shared research they'd done into similar phenomena, desperate to find some way to help him escape his predicament. But Riku had already made his decision. His last message was posted at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, just 2 simple words that would haunt the message board's community for years to come. "Good night." The thread fell silent after that. Users waited anxiously for updates that never came. Some tried to trace Riku's identity through his posting history, but the anonymous nature of the boards made it impossible to determine who he really was or where he lived. His user account remained inactive, a digital ghost that served as the only proof he'd ever existed at all. Months passed, then years. the monkey dream thread became legendary among internet horror enthusiasts, shared and discussed across multiple platforms and languages. Some claimed it was an elaborate piece of fiction, an early example of collaborative online storytelling. Others insisted that somewhere in Tokyo, a young office worker had vanished into a nightmare that bridged the gap between dreams and reality. But late at night, when the city grows quiet and the boundaries between worlds grow thin, some people still report hearing the distant sound of tiny cymbals echoing through empty subway tunnels and abandoned buildings. They say it's just the settling of old metal, the natural sounds of urban decay. But those who remember Riku's story know better. They know that some lessons never end, and some teachers never stop looking for new students to instruct in the deeper mysteries of pain. The legend of Monkey Dream reminds us that the spaces between sleep and waking are not as empty as we believe, and that sometimes the most innocent things, colorful trains and mechanical toys, can become doorways to horrors we never imagined possible.